In the mid-1960s, Disney quietly bought 27,000 acres of Central Florida. It didn't buy them as Disney. It used a dozen companies with names like Ayefour Corporation, so the cattlemen selling the land wouldn't realize who they were dealing with. 2 years later, Florida gave Disney something even more valuable than the land: its own government. It could run utilities, issue bonds, enforce building codes, operate a fire department, and on paper, even build a nuclear plant. The question is, how a private company got that much public power? Disney did not just get a one-of-a-kind deal. 13 years later, Florida turned a version of the same idea into a tool developers across the state could use. And that is why this story does not end at Disney World. Central Florida in the mid-1960s didn't look like a resort corridor. Contemporary accounts describe it as cattle pasture, palmetto scrub, pine flatwoods, and wetlands, cut through with small towns that had never seen anything bigger than a county fair. Land sold cheap, mostly because so much of it flooded. Accounts from the period put it somewhere around $200 an acre. An average Orlando home at the time cost about $15,000. One house could have bought 80 acres of what became the most visited resort on earth. Orange and Osceola counties ran on the assumptions of ordinary, slow growth. Local government had no system set up to handle a single buyer trying to assemble tens of thousands of acres for one project. The mismatch was the first problem Disney's lawyers had to solve, and it had nothing to do with government yet. If word got out that Walt Disney's company was buying land in Central Florida, every cattleman with a fence line nearby would hold out for a higher price, and the whole plan would get more expensive by the week. So the company never showed up as itself. It bought through a set of shell corporations with names built to sound like nothing at all: Ayefour Corporation, Latin American Development and Management Corporation, Tomahawk Properties, Reedy Creek Ranch, and Bay Lake Properties. One of those holding companies, Compass East Corporation, had actually been incorporated back in December 1964, sitting quietly for 2 years while the smaller purchases piled up underneath it. The sellers were cattlemen dealing with strangers, and as far as they knew, that's exactly what these buyers were. Disney's own point man on the ground, Bob Foster, scouted land under the pseudonym Bob Price, a fact straight from the company's own archives. By September 1966, roughly 27,000 acres sat under Compass East alone. Only once the land was locked down did Disney rename it the Walt Disney World Company, and that is when the secrecy turned into an inside joke. Several of the old shell company names are painted on storefront windows along Main Street, USA. If you have ever walked past one, you probably assumed it was just set dressing. It is the opposite of set dressing. Once a special district gets drawn on a map, its governing board gets elected by whoever owns the land inside the boundary, with votes counted by the acre rather than by the person. If Disney had left even a handful of independent ranchers inside that boundary, those ranchers would have had a real vote on how the district ran. So the land was bought quietly, acre by acre, company by company. Most of that land sat low and wet, which meant nothing could get built on it until someone drained it first. Florida already had a tradition of using special districts for exactly this kind of work. Water management and drainage districts were common wherever development meant reclaiming wetlands. And Chapter 298 of the Florida statutes gave those districts the power to build canals and levees, condemn land where necessary, and issue bonds to pay for it all. On March 11, 1966, the Disney-controlled landowners petitioned the Circuit Court in Orange County to form the Reedy Creek Drainage District under that same Chapter 298. The court approved it on May 13, 1966, and just like that, Disney's holding companies controlled a public corporation with the legal power to reshape the land under their own feet. The engineering scope wasn't small. Canals, retention basins, and flood control eventually had to be coordinated across roughly 25,000 acres, the same footprint the district still covers today, as one unified design instead of the usual patchwork of separate subdivisions, each solving their own drainage problem. Running that drainage district well did something else, something quieter. It showed state officials that Disney's holding companies could manage a public corporation and its bonds responsibly, which made the next ask easier to grant. It also handed Disney a working jurisdictional footprint, an actual set of boundaries, and functional responsibilities that would carry over almost entirely once the bigger charter came through a year later. But Chapter 298 still only went so far. It let Disney drain swampland and issue bonds. It didn't let the company write its own building codes, run its own power plant, or control zoning across a resort the size of a small city. That gap was the reason Disney went back to the legislature the following year. The footprint the district was about to cover measured roughly 25,000 acres. That is about the size of San Francisco or the Orlando city limits, depending on your frame of reference. The difference is, San Francisco has 800,000 residents. This one had 0. On May 12, 1967, Governor Claude Kirk signed House Bill 486, the Reedy Creek Improvement Act, into law. The new district, the law stated plainly, would carry the same authority and responsibilities as a county government. The governor signed 2 more bills that same afternoon, incorporating a pair of tiny cities inside the district's boundary, Bay Lake and the city of Reedy Creek, later renamed Lake Buena Vista. The 2 cities look like a footnote next to a law this big, but hold on to them, because what happens inside them later is the reason every vote in this story went the way Disney wanted. First, look at what same authority as a county government actually meant in practice, because that phrase is doing a lot of work. The Reedy Creek Charter ran about 92 pages, and it read less like a drainage law and more like a blueprint for a small country. Legal scholars who studied it later described it as a merging of public and private governance, a document that blurred the usual line between what a private company controls and what a government controls, all inside one corporate landowner's boundary. The charter carried over everything. Chapter 298 already allowed drainage, flood control, land reclamation, and then it kept adding. The powers fell into 3 categories. It could control what got built. The district could write and enforce its own building codes, and it was exempt from the state and county codes everyone else in Florida had to follow. If Disney wanted a taller ride structure or a different fire suppression standard than the county allowed, the district could simply write the rule it needed. In plain English, if Disney needed a rule that Orange County did not have, it could write the rule inside its own district. The charter also gave the district authority over land use and development across the entire property, which meant zoning decisions that would normally take months of county hearings could happen inside the company's own boardroom. This specific detail is what law reviews keep coming back to when they call Reedy Creek unusual. An ordinary drainage district manages canals and levees and not much else. Reedy Creek managed canals and levees and also decided what could get built, how tall it could be, and what it had to be made of, all under one roof. The authority even reached beyond the district's boundary. Reedy Creek used eminent domain for the C1 canal, taking land outside Disney property for what counted as a public drainage project. Eminent domain is normally a power reserved for counties, the state, or a utility company. A drainage district built to serve one company's land could take land it did not own, so long as the purpose counted as public use. It could build and run the services. The utilities went far beyond water and sewer. Reedy Creek could generate and deliver its own electric power, run its own natural gas distribution, and operate its own water and wastewater treatment facilities. It ran solid waste collection and its own environmental science laboratory to monitor all of it. None of it came from the county. All of it came from the district's own budget, on its own schedule, without a phone call to Tallahassee first. It also ran a real fire department and emergency medical service, not a symbolic one. 200 firefighters, not a theme park safety team. A real fire department with real ambulances and real equipment. Bigger than most small Florida cities operate, built inside a private resort's boundary before a single guest ever visited. It could finance the whole thing. The district could borrow money the way a county does by issuing tax-exempt bonds, which meant roads, power lines, and water systems could be financed years before a single paying guest walked through a gate without asking Orange or Osceola County taxpayers to cover $1 of it. And on paper, it could go even further. The charter gave the district legal authority to build a nuclear fission power plant or an airport. Neither was ever built, but the law left room for it because the legislature had written the charter broadly enough that almost nothing was off the table. The Florida Supreme Court reviewed the Reedy Creek Improvement Act in 1968 and upheld it as constitutional, which meant the state's highest court had signed off on a special district with county-level power, run in practice by a single corporate landowner. Disney's own explanation for why the legislature agreed to hand over that much power leaned on Walt Disney's unfinished dream for the property, an experimental city of tomorrow. That city would span 2 counties with 2 different sets of building rules. An ordinary government could never move fast enough to build it, or flexible enough to permit it. At a press conference in Winter Park in February 1967, Disney Vice President Don Tatum explained that the company needed its own government to serve the needs of the people who would eventually live and work there. That government, he said, would give the district clear authority to try construction techniques and environmental protections no county building code had ever addressed. The planned city, EPCOT, was never built the way Walt originally pictured it, but the promise of it is what got this exact list of powers written into Florida law. All of that power still needed someone to approve it, on paper, through a vote, and Disney had already made sure years earlier exactly who would be casting it. Most special districts in America work the way you would expect a government to work. Residents move in, residents vote, and the board answers to whoever those residents elect. Reedy Creek ran the vote backward. The district's board was elected by landowners, with votes weighted by acreage rather than counted one person at a time. After the shell company purchases, Disney's subsidiaries owned nearly all the land inside the district. Disney effectively elected the government that regulated Disney. The 2 cities inside it, Bay Lake and Lake Buena Vista, worked differently, but reached the same result. They were incorporated the same afternoon as the Improvement Act itself. On paper, they are ordinary Florida municipalities with mayors and city councils. In practice, their tiny populations, around 22 people in Bay Lake and 16 in Lake Buena Vista, were almost entirely Disney employees, retirees, and their families. The people voting and the company benefiting from the vote were never truly separate. If you are following how this works, subscribe to Florida Empire. There is a lot more Florida left to explain. That control let Disney finance and build real infrastructure, real roads, real drainage, a real fire department, on a timeline no ordinary election cycle could match. In 2004, Disney paid roughly 86% of the district's tax bill because Disney owned roughly 86% of the land and the district's services served that land. The company was effectively paying itself for its own fire department and roads, which is also why it could build them years ahead of anyone else needing them. For 56 years, Disney controlled the district through land ownership. Then, in 2023, Florida took that control away without taking away the district itself. In April 2022, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill dissolving the Reedy Creek Improvement District, effective June 1st, 2023. Before that date arrived, in February 2023, the legislature passed and the governor signed a follow-up bill that did something different than dissolve it. Instead, it renamed the district the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District and replaced the landowner-elected board with a 5-member board appointed by the governor and confirmed by the state Senate. Reporting on the bill points to one likely reason lawmakers chose to rename the district rather than dissolve and rebuild it from scratch. Dissolving it outright risked invalidating the bonds the district still owed money on. Renaming it, rather than starting over, was the version that kept the bondholders whole. The same law also removed the district's power to build a nuclear plant or an airport. What stayed the same is the footprint. The district still covers roughly 25,000 acres across Orange and Osceola counties, and it still runs the utilities, the roads, and the fire department, just under a new name and a new board. The specific structure that just changed at Reedy Creek, a landowner-controlled district building infrastructure before residents exist, didn't disappear from Florida when the board did. Pull out a Florida property tax bill. Find the line labeled CDD. That number is the direct descendant of the system Disney helped normalize. Here is how it got there. In 1980, Florida wrote that same basic idea into general law, available to any developer in the state, not just one company with a special act of the legislature behind it. It's called the Uniform Community Development District Act, Chapter 190 of the Florida statutes. It lets a developer form a district as an alternative to full municipal incorporation, one that can build infrastructure and issue bonds before a single resident moves in, with the governing board elected by landowners at the start, exactly like Reedy Creek's board was. Reedy Creek came 13 years before that statute, built through one company's special act of the legislature, rather than a law any developer could use. Legal scholars treat it as the working model that made the general statute politically possible. There's one real difference worth naming precisely, though. A community development district's board doesn't stay landowner-controlled forever in every case, but the transition isn't automatic. Under Chapter 190, the trigger is a threshold, not a calendar date. After 6 years for a standard district, or 10 years for one over 5,000 acres, the board seats start converting to resident election, but only once the district has at least 250 qualified electors living inside its boundary. If that threshold never gets met, landowner control just keeps running indefinitely. The Villages created its first community development district in 1992, 12 years after the statute, 25 after Reedy Creek. In the Villages, that threshold isn't met everywhere. The Village Center and Sumter Landing districts are built for commerce, not homes, so almost nobody lives inside their boundaries. Almost nobody living inside a boundary means almost no qualified electors, and no qualified electors means the vote never transitions. A structure identical to Reedy Creek, a landowner-elected board still running under the same rules Reedy Creek used, is still running today, inside one of Florida's largest retirement communities. The money works the same way it did at Reedy Creek. A community development district issues bonds to pay for roads, drainage, and utilities up front, then levies assessments on every property owner inside its boundary to pay that debt back over time. If you've ever looked at a Florida property tax bill and seen a CDD assessment on it, that's what you were looking at. Bonds first, infrastructure first, and a vote that only later includes the people actually living there. The Villages is the clearest example of how far this pattern has spread. The community is built and run through more than 25 separate community development districts. 15 of those cover the residential neighborhoods directly, numbered 1 through 15, with a 16th covering the section that spills into Lake County. Each one builds and maintains the roads, the storm drains, the underground utilities, and the streetlights that residents use every day. The pattern that built Walt Disney World's own government never really went away. It just scaled down and spread out, and now it runs the roads and the drainage under a lot of Florida driveways, including maybe your own. Subscribe to Florida Empire for more of how these places actually get built, one legal document at a time.